Hi everybody, thanks so much for tuning into this video, thanks for checking out my channel, and thanks for checking out this topic. I think it's going to be an interesting one. Alright, this is going to be a quick video. I just wanted to release a shorter video because my last video was pretty long, but it involved the culmination of a lot of my work and research. So if you can, please also check out that video. But now I wanted to move on to some other things, so again, today is just going to be a really quick topic. For those of you who are new to the channel, I'm a university professor and a former atheist. Now, I'm theologically uncommitted, but I'm asking a lot of questions that I hope to answer with an open mind and a scholarly perspective, and hopefully with a little help from all of you. Don't forget to like this video if you get something out of it, and please also subscribe to the channel. Click the bell icon also for notifications so that you don't miss out on future videos. And most importantly, please voice your comments in the comment section. I really get a lot out of your comments, and I try to earnestly respond to each and every comment. Alright, so now let's switch gears and get to the meat of today's video. So today, I wanted to talk about the events in Roman-controlled Judea in the year 363 CE. And this is an event that most people aren't familiar with. So hopefully, some of you will find some educational value in this topic. Even though we sort of think with our current modern lens that there was a slow progressive recognition of Christianity in the Roman Empire, this really wasn't a linear process. A key moment in the history of the religion happened in the year 313 when Emperor Constantine signed the Edict of Milan. This made Christianity legal and mitigated a lot of anti-Christian violence which had been prominent in the preceding centuries. Then, in the year 380, Emperor Theodosius I made Christianity the official state religion, which marked a period of expansion and aggrandizement, with enforcement of Christianity from a central government and from above, changing what Christianity had been up until that point, which was really more of a grassroots movement. But in between, Rome actually had a pagan emperor who was Flavius Claudius Julianus. He rejected Christianity, and he sought to revive traditional Greco-Roman polytheism for a few different reasons. One of his strategies was to align himself with Judaism. He wanted to restore and promote Judaism to gain an upper hand against the Christians. He also supported Judaism because Judaism and paganism had in common the practice of animal sacrifice, and Julian saw this as a significant alignment. So in the year 363, Emperor Julian, or Julian the Apostate as he is now sometimes remembered, devoted a significant amount of funds to building a third holy temple in Jerusalem. We actually also have a first-hand, neutral source of evidence for what actually happened. That resource is Ammianus Marcellinus. I'll put his full quote on the screen right now, but we get a few important points from this quote. And he wasn't even really neutral, by the way. He was a strong supporter of Emperor Julian. Now, Marcellinus does not directly use the word earthquake in this quote, but we do know from other attestations and the geological record that there was an earthquake in precisely that year, probably in the window in which the temple was being constructed. So here's what we get out of the quote from Marcellinus. First, we know that there was a big expense of imperial funds, so funds from the emperor himself, in rebuilding the temple. We also know that something happened repeatedly that interrupted construction of the third temple. In the words of Marcellinus, frightful balls of fire broke out near the foundation and repeatedly scorched the workers until the workers would approach the construction site no more, and the attempt to rebuild the temple was given up. Now, wait a second. Is this an endorsement of a miraculous event from a neutral third-party witness? At first glance, it certainly seems that way. Now, there were several other sources who describe what happened, but none of these are first-hand witnesses, and they all have layers of theological motivation. The other witnesses, and I included them in an earlier draft of this video, but I decided to delete some of their testimony just because it wasn't really relevant, but these are all Christian writers, and they include Socrates Scholasticus, Sozomen, Theodoret of Cyrus, Rufinus, and Gregory of Nazianzus. The important thing is that they add that this was probably at or around the time of an earthquake. Gregory of Nazianzus wrote extensively about this event in Oration 5, Second Invective against Julian, and he talked about describing a furious blast of wind, a sudden heaving of the earth, which tells us that it was probably an earthquake, and a fire from the foundations. And he also talked about even the spontaneous appearance of crosses, but most neutral scholars think that this was probably a later theological embellishment. Ephraim the Syrian, who is a revered monk and deacon, also wrote a contemporary account. He mentioned in his hymns against Julian that God sent storms and earthquakes that stopped the work, in fulfillment of Daniel's prophecy that the sanctuary would remain desolate forever. But again, the best attestation, and probably the closest to a neutral attestation, still comes from Ammianus Marcellinus. Now, let's try to combine the body of information that we've reviewed so far with what we know from historical scholarship. First, we know that there was strong anticipation of the rebuilding of the temple. We know that there was an influx of Jews into Jerusalem in the year 363. Second, we know that Jerusalem continued to be a location of strong antagonism between Jews, pagans, and Christians in that era. Third, we do know that there was a sudden stop of the construction effort. Even from a skeptical lens, we have enough evidence here that most skeptical scholars agree that some sort of violent event occurred that destroyed the early work which had been done. Fourth, we also know that the project to rebuild the Third Temple was abandoned, and it was actually never resumed up until this day. Fifth, we do know that Marcellinus was an admirer of Emperor Julian, so therefore it's a pretty good conclusion and pretty warranted that he had no motivation to endorse a Christian narrative. Let's also briefly touch on what we know about Emperor Julian and his motivations. Well, we also know that the motivations of Julian in this enterprise were essentially all anti-Christian. We know that Julian wanted to achieve a few goals, including number one, a refutation of Christianity, number two, again, a revival of the Jewish sacrificial tradition, and number three, loyalty from the Jews in his ongoing war against the Persians. Now, we know from Marcellinus' account that Julian spent a lot of money on this project, and it probably wasn't an active project for very long. Now, luckily, we can also incorporate evidence from the geological record. Jerusalem is about 25 kilometers from the Dead Sea Transform fault system. We know of about 18 earthquakes that have happened in Jerusalem over the last 2,000 years. And by the way, we also know about an earthquake that happened in the years 26 to 36 CE, which does correspond to the crucifixion period, but most neutral scholars don't see this as corroborating evidence of an earthquake at the exact time of the crucifixion of Jesus. We know that there was a large earthquake that struck the area in precisely the year 363 CE. We also know that there are some subterranean cavities under the Temple Mount. Now, this is important because these cavities can act as reservoirs for the buildup of natural gases. There are a few examples of fires in association with earthquakes, likely as a result of natural gas emissions. These aren't very common, and it's somewhat debated as to whether or not natural gas releases during an earthquake can result in an actual ignition into fires. I'll put them on the screen, but here are a few examples of earthquakes that probably had a fire partially as a result of natural gas emissions, and the list is on the screen. Maybe the closest parallel is the Great Kanto earthquake in 1923, which was a really horrific event. It was a magnitude 7.9 earthquake, but most of the fires that probably happened were exacerbated by the release of natural gases, but probably caused by ruptured gas mains, cooking stoves that fell over, and it was probably also exacerbated by the fact that the neighborhood in which it occurred was largely a wood-constructed region. We do, however, also seem to know that Jerusalem has all of the natural features that would make ignition of an earthquake at least theoretically possible from the mechanisms that we can conjecture. But we don't actually have very clear evidence that an earthquake itself will produce fire out of the ground without a pre-existing flame. Now, by the way, Marcellinus does seem to indicate that there were several of these events and that the workers were burned several times at some point. This is a little bit more unusual, but we do know that earthquake swarms can occur and can result in repeated episodes that may have conceivably repeatedly released flames. Now, this is pretty much everything we know. So now we have to ask ourselves a question: how do we interpret these events from the year 363? Well, I did a few statistical calculations just for my own interest using Bayesian analysis. I don't want to lose too many people, so I'm probably going to avoid presenting those. But we can estimate the probability of an earthquake occurring during the window of the weeks to months when construction on the Third Temple was ongoing. So the odds, using very conservative numbers, are probably about 1 in 750 that an earthquake would have happened during that narrow window of time. But what does that mean? If an earthquake happened during a historical time period of significance to produce a specific outcome, is that providence or is that just chance? How do we define a miracle? We have a naturalistic explanation, so does that exclude this being a miracle? As with many of my other videos, I don't have an answer to this. It does seem like this earthquake and the fireballs that it produced constitutes at the very least a very weird coincidence. But what do you all think? I'm grateful for the audience of my videos, but I have a feeling that Christians will see this as a divine miracle, but skeptics will probably see this as just an interesting and strange coincidence. Was it the wrath of the Old Testament God against the Jews for aligning themselves with the pagans? Was this divine judgment fulfilling the prophecy of Jesus? Or was this just a natural tragedy, which curiously and coincidentally seems to line up with theological beliefs? Now, here's a counterfactual question for all of you. What would have happened if the Third Temple had been built? This probably would have been a major blow to Christianity and a negation of the prophecies of Jesus. Would that have changed the subsequent growth of Christianity? Gavin Stoddart, Paula Fredrickson, and H. Rowley, who are all secular historians, have voiced that the construction of a third temple probably would have undercut the predictions of Jesus. And here's another question. Why are the Jews so silent about this in the historical record? I was really expecting to find at least something obliquely or opaquely written by the Jews. Some scholars say that it's due to embarrassment, that this was an embarrassing episode for the Jews. But what do you think? Jewish literature seems to be pretty good at documentation, so this silence to me seems surprising. From a historical perspective, Christians viewed this as the last great sign validating the Christian interpretation of the destruction of the Great Temple. Christian writers would later refer to this event as the final public miracle of judgment in late antiquity. From the standpoint of Greco-Roman history, this was sort of the last stand of paganism. As I mentioned at the top of this video, Christianity would soon after this become the official religion of the Roman Empire. So, I have a lot of thoughts about this, but as with all my videos, I'm really more interested in what you think. If you get something out of this video, please click the like button. If you haven't subscribed already, I would really love that. It does really help us out. Click the bell icon for notifications so that you don't miss out on future videos. And maybe most importantly, please make sure that you comment on this video. I've learned so much from your comments, and I continue to learn from many of you who are very, very well versed in a lot of these episodes from history. So I really do hope that I keep learning from all of you. Let me know what you think about these events and how we should interpret them. As we approach the holiday season, I'm thankful for a lot of things, and one of those things is my YouTube community, even though this is a very new channel, including the many skeptics who comment on my videos. I'm really grateful for all of you, so thanks so much for sharing just a few moments of your day with me. And my other really biggest hope, and the other thing that I want to ask for from all of you, is please have a really wonderful day.